Today I'm going to be working on cleaning up this piece. I don't know why, but the seam seems to be a little rough on this one. The registration wasn't quite right, and it rises up a little bit on one side. I've also got some sprue stems left over here, a big bubble here, and overall just a seam cleanup job. So this is very typical of what you'll find with a resin kit, and today I'm going to show you how to clean it up. For something like this where the registration is fairly good, I'm going to start out with two different kinds of sandpaper, 220 and 320. 320 is a little bit finer than the 220. I don't know if you knew that about sandpapers. So I'll start with some 220 just to knock down that seam as much as possible, and then move to the 320 to get a little finer. What I'm not going to do is start with a file on this. The fear would be that I knock it down too far too fast, and then there's damage done that I have to repair. I'm going to tackle these things now. Normally what I do is take a Dremel tool with a drum sander and just knock those down, but it's really late right now and I don't want to wake the neighbors, so I'm just going to use a file to take those down. But the trick is I want to be careful to keep the file going straight back and forth and not wobble like that, because then I'll end up knocking down these edges. You can see I've knocked down the sprues on the end, all gone. Seems pretty clean. Got a little bit of work to do still in here. What I'm going to do next is grab a file, because I want to take care of little details like this. You can see there's a little bit of a seam on a finer detail, and my feeling is that if I went in with sandpaper, I'd end up wrecking some of the other parts. Like I might not get quite the shape I want, I might knock down some other stuff that I don't intend to. So for these finer details, I'm going to go in with a file. I have a set of files that I picked up from a hobby store literally like 10-15 years ago, and they've served me very well ever since. There's a bunch of different shapes. This is like a flat one with an edge to it that you can use. There's a round one. There's like one with a rounded shape to it. There's a triangular one. It's all different kinds of shapes and different things you can use to get the edges you want. So let's take a look at that one right there that I was going to take care of. Very carefully flatten that seam out. Another thing to be careful of when using files or sandpaper is them filling up with powder, which sort of renders them useless. There's a couple different techniques for cleaning them out, but often just a quick tap will do it. You can like wipe it on your hand. I think I did that earlier on in the video, or you can use a wire brush to take it out. And I need to do the same thing with this seam right here, right there. Also, looking ahead, you can see on this seam, even though I sanded it down a little bit, it still needs some cleanup. We need to do some putty work in there, which we'll take care of soon. Another thing that files are good for, in ways that sandpaper are getting a really hard edge to it. Like with something like this part, if I was using sandpaper, it'd just sort of round it out, smooth it out a little bit. But what I want to do is maintain that crispy edge on it. I've gotten to a point where I'm pretty happy with the way the seams are cleaned up. But what do I want to address now are things like this bubble right here on the end. I'm also going to want to take a look at all these little tiny bubbles around here. And there's a bunch of those subcutaneous bubbles in here. The technique I use for cleaning those up is I first go in and pop them and open them up a little bit. What I'm going to want to do is fill them up with putty. But if there's just a tiny, tiny little hole and it's filled with powder, that's very hard to do. So what I'm doing is just using an X-Acto knife to open those up a little bit. And there's a bunch of those subcutaneous ones up here. And I don't really mind that I'm making kind of a big hole in here, because this is all going to get puttied over and patched up. The question is, Why even bother with these subcutaneous bubbles? Why not just leave them there? And my answer is that if you paint them, if you paint over them the way they are, and then it turns into like a warm day, the air inside those bubbles can expand. They can either pop and wreck your paint job, or on the other hand, they can contract, and then you get a bunch of pits. If this was a prop that was going to be used on film, I probably wouldn't bother because it'd never be seen. But this is something that's going to sit on my shelf, and I want it to look very pretty, you know, for close-up handling and viewing. So I figure I would take care of it.